A new day is coming in Latin America. It's coming. In Venezuela.
Chased by the deep state, fighting for independence, thinking about revolution, looking for alternative solutions. The enemies of the deep state will tell you what others even don't dare to think. Manuel Ochsenreiter and Mateusz Piskorski.
Hello. Welcome back to our geopolitical podcast, DieGutenMenschen, Public Enemies of the Deep State. My name is Manuel Ochsenreiter. I am editor-in-chief of German Zuerst News magazine, and I am, as usual and always, talking to Mr. Mateusz Piskorski from Poland. Hello, Mateusz.
Hello. Representing also the weekly magazine Myśl Polska, Polish Thought.
First question, how is Corona situation? How is the life in the bunker? Did something change?
Well, we still have some supplies, and I guess that it will be enough for us to live at least until the elections, when all Poland will be free of coronavirus. It will be very soon, on the 10th of May.
Because your prime minister or your president ordered Corona to stop until then, right?
Yes, that was his idea of the best way to fight the pandemics is the fight with the pandemics on the level of a social construct, which means that if they will tell us that Corona is over, then Corona will be over.
I believe in that. I strongly believe in that.
So let's wait until May. But the Corona itself, of course, is everywhere on the headlines. We practically read only about coronavirus. And of course, I would not question the validity of the topic anyway, because it impacts our lives. Anyway, in the shadow of Corona, there are some geopolitical processes that are still ongoing. The processes which have been launched before, I guess some of them are taking place in different parts of our world since many months, some of them since many years. But now, using the fact that all the public opinion is focused only on the topic of Corona, for instance, on the Caribbean Sea near Venezuelan coast, we have quite interesting things happening. I have heard, for instance, about a German vessel there. Yes, is that true?
We won our first sea battle since many decades against the Venezuelan Coast Guard. The Venezuelan Coast Guard was approaching a German former tourist ship, which is now under Portuguese flag, and wanted to stop it, and the ship didn't stop. So the Coast Guard was trying to hit it by a collision. What the Coast Guard ship didn't know was that the German tourist ship actually was an icebreaker with a very it was a very hard ship. So the Venezuelan Coast Guard ship was sinking, and yes, it's quite a little entertaining incident. Yes.
Yeah, before the German military thought was used and instrumentalized by the US, and now the same things happen, I guess, because again there is a US invasion being prepared there, and as an avant-garde of this US invasion, they decided to send a German vessel.
Really? Yes.
I guess so.
Under Portuguese flag, yes.
Yes, and I cannot find another explanation of that.
Now when you say it, I have to admit it's true.
Yes. Anyway, we see the geopolitical tensions, of course, since several years between Venezuela and between the US. Venezuela and its Bolivarian identity is an identity of South American, Latin American sovereignism, of South American independent thought, and independent geopolitical doctrine, which of course collides with the very well-known old American Monroe Doctrine concerning the idea of controlling both Americas by United States, yes?
Yes.
And we have now the whole process and the whole conflict continuing and even intensifying because have you heard that Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, has been called officially by American authorities, by prosecutor general and so on, not as a president because they think there's another president in Venezuela,
Yeah.
the one they pay, yes. Juan Guaido, but as an international criminal.
Yeah, didn't they
Yeah.
put a bounty on Maduro's head?
Yes, $50 million.
Wow.
$50 million. So, well, hopefully Maduro is still in his bunker somewhere in Caracas and no one will find him. Anyway.
Hey, Mr. Maduro, are you okay? He is okay. He's fine. Don't worry.
Oh, that's great. So, anyway, it's quite an interesting example how the US did that. Well, they just create some artificial media reality showing that this guy is not a president. The president is a guy who is working for us, regardless all the constitutional issues and whatsoever. Then they claim officially, the American prosecutor general claims that Mr. Maduro is a criminal, a drug trafficker, a drug dealer, and a guy who is, well, someone like Pablo Escobar in the neighbor Colombia in the past, yes. But Manuel, I don't know if you have noticed that there is, it's an old style concept to get rid of a leader of an independent country, because they did the same to their former ally, to Manuel Noriega.
Absolutely, and what is interesting, I mean, we are not just talking now about a very new development. Washington is really now trying, not just for months, but, well, we have to say for years, to destabilize and to overthrow the Venezuelan government, and they are simply not achieving their aim. What is a very interesting fact when you see how easy or how easy it seemed, at least, to work out in other countries. In Venezuela, there it seems not to work out as Washington would like to.
Well, in Venezuela, first and foremost, you have, in my opinion at least, a strong identity and a strong, deeply rooted ideology of, let's say, the socialism of the 20th century, as it was called by Hugo Chavez. And the figure of Hugo Chavez, of course, was very charismatic. He was a charismatic leader. He was a symbol for Venezuela, not only for Venezuela, for whole Bolivarian Latin America, South America. And by the way, I think that Hugo Chavez was someone similar for South Americans, like Colonel Gaddafi was for many of African countries, yes?
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. And I think the comparison also with some Arab Spring developments is not so wrong, because when you read interviews and statements of Venezuelan opposition figures, they might be clearly against Maduro, but they are much more clearly against any US-American interference. So I think we can compare that also a little bit, for example, with Syria, not in, of course in the level of civil war or generally war or proxy war, what we see there, but that in Venezuela the huge amount of people of the political class and the responsible class, that for them it's very clear that they would rather stand with their own president or with their own leader than to enable a foreign power to invade their country.
Of course, regardless all the criticism addressed at Maduro and his way of governing and of coping with the crisis since several years. Nevertheless, I guess that the Americans have two possible scenarios for the moment being, I mean the US, for Venezuela. The first one is, of course, full-scale intervention. I, of course, do not mean a land intervention, but some airstrikes. That's why they are moving their fleet near to the coast, to the northern coast of Venezuela. This is the first scenario, so direct military aggression. The second scenario, and I think that Maduro was talking about this scenario, that it's the most probable for the moment being, is to invade Venezuela with some terrorist groups trained in Colombia, in the neighboring Colombia, which is under control of US, of course, I mean the country. So I think that probably they could use the second scenario. On the other hand, if they would have a small direct aggression and direct war, it would be quite in line with the American tradition, because otherwise, Donald Trump is going to finish his first term very soon, and it would be quite a historical thing that he would be a first president since several decades that hadn't started any conflict. Any war, actually, yes. So that would be quite strange for the US. So maybe Donald Trump is still waiting for his war till the very last months of his first term, and he's planning to attack Venezuela directly. But I personally think that they might use the tactics of internal destabilization, that the American intelligence, as we know, because it was publicly announced, the American intelligence is trying to corrupt, to bribe as many of the members of the elite of the governing party as possible, that they are going to create, this is a very simple scenario, that they are going to create a kind of government of national unity because of coronavirus, because of the economic crisis and so on. And in this government, of course, controlled by Washington, they would like to gather those people who betray Maduro and the governing party, as well as their own agents like Juan Guaido. What do you think about possible scenarios?
Yes, I think it's very likely, and under that prism, the coronavirus campaign is really helpful also, since it will sooner or later also strike in Venezuela, and the US can then even show themselves as maybe the big supporter and the big medical helper. Although Donald Trump seems right now not to deal very lucky with coronavirus in his own country. But what is interesting is also the international context of the Venezuelan crisis, since what not a lot of people know is that, and I hope I will now pronounce the name in a correct way, Guaido. Is that correct? Guaido? I don't know.
Yes, I think so.
Since Guaido and his party are members of the Socialist International and not Maduro and his party, what many people might think. So there is also coming a lot of support for Guaido by the social democratic movements in the world. One would rather estimate to be in support for Maduro, but also that might play sooner or later a role. What do you think?
Well, yes, definitely. You have to acknowledge that the Social Democratic or the Socialist International or the Party of European Socialists in the European Parliament is quite liberal, so it's a mainstream liberal party, mainstream political formation. And that's why there's a slight difference between the anti-system left in different countries. Anti-system left, which is to a large extent inspired by Hugo Chavez,
Yes.
the so-called Chavism,
Mhm.
and the social democratic, politically correct so-called left, because in my opinion it has nothing to do with the left as such, which is supportive for different American initiatives and American puppets like Guaido. Anyway, it will be quite interesting to follow what is going on there in Venezuela, so we recommend it to our listeners as well. And well, I think that the main problem when it comes to Venezuela is that definitely Maduro is not so charismatic as Chavez used to be. What do you think?
Yes, absolutely not. I mean, I had also the opportunity to speak with a group already last year, with a group of totally dedicated fans of Hugo Chavez, not necessarily ideological fans, but let me say of the charismatic leader. Chavez, who were very, very inconfident with Maduro, and that is where I took this opinion out that, of course, they are totally against any U.S. American or EU interference in their country. They say we have to solve our problems ourselves, and Maduro has also now to show that he is a real leader and not just capitulating before or in front of the economic problems. But we can agree that Maduro is for sure no Chavez. I mean that is totally clear, and I'm not sure if there is a second Chavez or a second person with that format available. That is what I don't know.
Yes, definitely, but it is also an opportunity for a transformation of a leader. If you look at several examples from different countries which were victims of destabilization, usually by the US. If you look, for instance, at Syria, in my opinion, Bashar al-Assad was completely non-charismatic and even perceived as just technocrat without any ideological positions and so on before the so-called Arab Spring. Yes. Now his personal skills as a politician as a leader are definitely higher than they used to be before 2011.
In my opinion, Bashar al-Assad precisely became a national leading figure precisely in the moment when he refused in 2011 and 2012 the offers of other Arabic countries to go there for exile and to move out of the presidential palace. He said something, I'm president of the Syrians and my job is to be here, and if necessary I will die with my Syrians. So in that moment he became the leader, and I think he gained a lot of respect overnight by that kind of decision.
Yes, so regardless all the differences between the cultures, the civilizations, of course we cannot compare Venezuela to Syria or to Arabic world. Nevertheless, theoretically, Nicolas Maduro also has an opportunity, a chance to become a national leader in the future. If he successfully defends his country against all those plans of destabilization, as far as I know, he is still conveying a big military campaign called Bolivarian Shield in the moment being. So hopefully he'll make it, and then he has a real chance to become someone perhaps not so charismatic and beloved as Hugo Chavez was, but anyway, a real leader of Venezuela and its people.
What is interesting in this context is I was reading a lot about the threats against Maduro, and we spoke about the Wild West style bounty on his head, what is what comes from Washington. So we always hear about the threats, but I didn't hear or read about any attempts to bribe him, to make it more convenient for him to get out of the position. Maybe they don't repeat the same mistake they did with Bashar al-Assad. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I guess so, but on the other hand, I think that they don't want any compromise for the moment being, because they need, let's say, to victimize at least one leader which is opposing them in the region, to show all the others that it's quite dangerous to oppose their politics in South America. Yes, that's why I think they are not going to discuss any kinds of compromises, of course. And of course, it's also, remember that it's also business. I mean, in times of crisis, maybe it's not so important directly for the moment being, but most of the oil refineries in Florida, in Southern American states, are using the Venezuelan oil because they are adjusted to produce all their products on Venezuelan oil, and well, they cannot use another oil, including the oil which is extracted in the United States itself. So it's also about business, to be honest, and in this case it will be very, very important also to look at the reactions of another global players like Russia and China, who were quite supportive for Venezuela and its leader since several years. So well, hopefully Russia and China will be able to somehow defend Venezuela, or at least, I mean, not physically defend, but at least to prevent the direct military aggression of US.
Yes, I mean, when it comes to the UN Security Council, I think both the Russian Federation and the Chinese People's Republic became something like a secure resistance, at least against any decisions done by the UN Security Council. But well, we will see if it comes as you think that maybe Donald Trump will need, or he might think he will need, his also maybe limited military conflict before the elections. I cannot imagine that Russia or China would send direct physical help in such a conflict. Well, what do you think?
Of course, but Russia and China have other possibilities to influence the decision making in United States.
That is
I mean, first they have, for instance, the possibility of, let's say, economic pressure. Second, they have the possibility, I think that on the 9th of April there will be a meeting of the OPEC Plus group, which means a meeting about the prices of oil and the control of oil production. The US is quite interested to let's say, successfully finish this crisis when it comes to oil markets, because they are, I mean, several companies which are using the fracking method in the United States to produce oil and gas are going bankrupt. Yes? Yeah. So probably Russia will have a good argument to explain the US several issues. Also when it comes to, let's say, defending and preventing the aggression against its allies. And I remind that Venezuela was a loyal ally of Russia, as well as it was a loyal ally of China. When it comes to Russia, for instance, I don't know if you remember that Venezuela is one of the very few countries which have officially recognized the independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia.
Yes, of course, yeah.
So there's a huge, let's say, tradition of mutual cooperation and understanding. Hopefully, there will be no direct military conflict, although I completely understand the leadership of Venezuela. that they are trying to organize this Bolivarian shield, because I'm pretty sure that there will be some armed terrorist groups coming from neighboring Colombia to destabilize the situation there.
Yes. But what makes all that really interesting, and I think that is, I think you agree, it might be maybe the very first time since very long, is that we today cannot at all say what will be maybe today in a week or maybe even in less time. We see Donald Trump right now fighting inside the United States the horrible effects of coronavirus. We see an explosion of the numbers of unemployed. There is also the danger of social unrest. So what is quite possible is that Washington would be so busy with itself, and that the Washington administration around Donald Trump might identify the real war they have to fight and to win, the war now against the virus, and for the economic development of the US, that everything what we right now talked about will look totally different maybe already next week. What do you think? I think that makes it right now really tensed and interesting how things are going on. I mean, who would have thought that just 2 months ago, what we are discussing today about with Corona, with public unrest, with protests, with people storming supermarkets in Sicily, in Italy. So all these developments can also hit the US, and then they might have far other problems than interfering in a foreign country. Or what do you think?
Well, definitely yes. To some extent, of course. To some extent, we had a situation which was described many years ago by Francis Fukuyama as an end of history. I mean, not geopolitically, because of course we had different processes of transforming the world from the world with a US hegemony towards the world with a multipolar order. That's true. That's definitely, we understood that it was a mistake of Fukuyama. Everyone knew that it was a very short period of a unipolar world in the 90s, and that it's over. But when it comes to, if you read the books of Fukuyama, he was also writing that there will be a, let's say, capitalist, liberal economic order all over the world, yes? And I think that, well, nowadays we also see that Fukuyama was not right also when it comes to social economic system. Yes. Which means that there are different, that there will be different scenarios for the world. And what is interesting here, because you have touched a very important problem, is the problem of possible revolutionary scenarios in Western countries.
But that will be the topic of our next podcast, because I think it is a big topic. And you told me we had some questions from our audience we might answer in our next podcast, right?
Yes, in our next podcast we'll talk a little bit about the theory of revolution, and we'll try to define for ourselves and for our listeners as well what revolution really is. What does it mean for us? A political, a geopolitical revolution, a social revolution, or maybe a philosophical, intellectual revolution. So we'll be discussing about it in our next podcast.
And I think that will be a very interesting topic, because if you talk today to the people, to whoever, you will have very hard times to find someone who will tell you that he or she simply wants to go back to the times before the crisis. So almost everyone tells you there has something elementary to change, not just we need here a reform or there a reform. So more and more people ask for real changes, and I think that is also what we can already interpret as a revolutionary thought in their intentions.
Well, in my opinion, there are three possible scenarios for the moment. One is a modified, let's say, strengthened version of what I would call Pinochetism, which means a neoliberal authoritarian state which would strongly control the population, the social movements, social unrest, social protests, and so on, with very, very sophisticated instruments, but would protect the international capital and the neoliberal financial order. Second one is a reformist scenario. If the crisis will not be so deep, then they could just decide to implement some reforms in a social democratic vein, just to, let's say, calm down the people. And the third scenario, which is quite possible as well, is a scenario of a revolution. I do not mean necessarily a revolution which would take lives of thousands of people, but perhaps a peaceful revolution, just with the protests on the streets. But anyway, let's talk about different options in our next podcast, because the topic is quite big, I guess.
I'm looking forward.
So we hope also to get some feedback from our listeners. Feel free to write us if you would like to ask us something, to ask about our opinion about something, or just to criticize us. You're welcome. We'll also answer your critics then.
Criticize Mateusz then, okay? So, okay.
Okay. I'll take all the criticism on me.
I take the praises.
No. But no? If I'll take the criticism at me, I'll criticize you, okay?
Yeah, you feel safe in your bunker, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
This program was presented to you by Manuel Ochsenreiter and Mateusz Piskorski, the hottest dissident who won't violate any time the global rules against racism, extremism, or any other bad isms.